Now let's go live to Cape Town. Agang leader and well-known activist Mamphele Ramphele is standing by to talk to us. Welcome and good morning to you. You put out a statement a little earlier this morning and you say this in part: as we mourn the loss and celebrate his life and his achievements, let us dedicate ourselves, you write, to the kind of selfless service which he exemplified. This morning, Mamphele Ramphele, how do you want South Africans to be remembering Nelson Mandela?
They must remember Nelson Mandela as a person who loved people very deeply. And for me, it's the loss of someone who embraced me fully as his daughter and my children as his grandchildren. He was truly human. The spirit of Ubuntu exuded from him, whether he was dealing with royalty or with ordinary people, whether he was dealing with adults or with children. And for that, we are grateful to Madiba for setting the example of how one leads a life that is fully meaningful in the global, national, but also in the personal sense.
Dr. Ramphele, take us back to July 1988, if you would. It was at Pollsmoor Prison, and that's where I understand you met him for the first time. You also say that he showed his greatness in his willingness to acknowledge mistakes, but also someone that put you at ease during that first meeting. Recall that time for us, if you would.
Well, that was an amazing morning for me. I was supposed to have been there at 7:30, but I was early. I woke up at 6 and I was already there much, much earlier, because the anticipation of meeting a global icon that I never got to know at his own invitation was just overwhelming. And I remember watching him walk along a passageway, tall, towering over the warders who were walking with him, but with this very open, gentle smile that shone through his eyes. And as he walked into the room where I was waiting, extending his hand and immediately embracing me and putting me at ease, because you can imagine how nervous I was meeting this man for the first time and not knowing why he invited me to go and meet him.
I think you speak for so many people that must have experienced that nervousness on meeting him for the first time, and that dissipated so quickly, didn't it? Can you reflect a little further, if you wouldn't mind breaking confidence, about the conversation that you had with him, if you can?
Well, what was striking about the conversation was just how much he knew about me, how much he knew about what was going on in the country, and how interested he was in me, the person, and how complimentary he was about the fact that I had to struggle with loss. And it was very easy for him to share a sense of, I too have gone through loss, but it is what you make of your losses, how you rise from the blows that those losses entail, that makes you a stronger or a weaker person. And so we immediately bonded at that level. But what was also striking was how interested he was in the work I was doing. At that time, I was at the University of Cape Town as a researcher working on poverty in South Africa, which led to the book Uprooting Poverty, the South African Challenge, which was published in 1989, co-authored with Francis Wilson. He knew so much about the kind of issues we were raising, and he kept saying, you've got to continue to do this important academic work because it is going to be essential for us to have a firm foundation for the rebuilding of South Africa.
Another issue that he engaged with later, and again I refer to your statement, was the whole notion of HIV/AIDS denialism. You say this: he could not live with the impact of his party being responsible for the deaths of countless thousands of South Africans who were denied antiretroviral treatment. Talk us through that line of thinking, if you would.
Well, that was a very traumatic time for me as a medical doctor who had dedicated my professional life to working with poor people, to see my own country with all of the expertise, all of the resources, failing to rise to the challenge of accepting and dealing with HIV/AIDS. I said, Tata, perhaps the best way for you to help President Mbeki to acknowledge this is for you to claim or to accept responsibility for not having dealt with it earlier during your presidency. And he did. He made that public statement in the hope that his successor will then feel free to then engage with the issue without feeling personal liability. But unfortunately, as we know, that was not accepted by President Mbeki. In fact, it is one of the saddest things that President Mandela was literally humiliated in a National Executive Committee meeting for raising this issue in the way that he did. And I think it's one of the issues that made him truly sad about the gap between his own view of public service and the conduct of, in that particular case, his successor.
Dr. Ramphele,
and the fact that his
very
own
quickly,
son...
I am going to interrupt you there because time, as you can well imagine, is very tight as far as our programming is concerned today. Just very quickly, when last did you see him? And again, if you can recall what he said to you.
I saw him the last time in around July, August. And at that time, he couldn't speak because he was on oxygen and he could only speak with his eyes and his beautiful smile. And we sat there and held hands, and there was this beaming smile from ear to ear, and that's all he said. And that was plenty.
Thank you very much for talking to us live in Cape Town. Agang leader Mamphele Ramphele here on eNCA.